Hey guys, this is Dr. Locke. Today we are going to walk through the first assignment in XPrep, this XPrep 1 Intro Formula Function Practice. I'm going to walk through that with you to help you get a good start in using formulas in Excel and also introduce you to how to work with functions. So follow that link and go ahead and download your empty file. All right, so your empty file should look like this. I've opened it up in Excel, and there's an overview tab, a practice 1 and a practice 2. So we're going to look at some information on this overview sheet first, and then we will do some practice in these other two sheets before we submit it to XPrep for grading. So in your overview sheet, you see some information here about Excel formulas. So first of all, Excel formulas always begin in a cell with an equal sign, and then you enter the rest of the formula into that cell. So notice, so this is cell A3 in the sheet. This is showing a picture of it, and in that cell we have a formula that is written because it begins with an equal sign. So this is saying in cell A3 what I want to display is the result of adding the value in A1 plus the value in A2. So that's a 3 plus a 5. And down here you see the result. 3 plus 5 is 8. So you see the formula displayed here, and you see the result of the formula down below. A formula in Excel can be made up of then cell references like here, A1 and A2. You could have operations, plus, minus, etc. Or you could have Excel functions. Excel functions look like this. The word sum is the name of an Excel function that adds up contents of various cells or whatever is inside these parentheses. And then here is an argument for that function. The argument is what you're passing into the function, and then you want the function to be applied to that argument. Some functions have multiple arguments. So we're going to look at some examples of that. So here's an example of some data in cells A1 through A10. And let's take a look at this. In A1, we have the value 5. A2, we see the value 6, etc. There are 10 values there. And so there are different ways that we could add all of those numbers up in Excel. One way is to write a formula that looks like this, equals A1 plus A2 plus A3, etc. We could just use the plus sign to add up those 10 different values that are in those cell references. Another way is to use the sum function with multiple arguments, or we could use the sum function with a single argument that is that range of cells. So we're going to practice doing those different things in our first practice sheet. So click on the Practice 1 tab to display that sheet. And here we have some data and some different instructions we need to follow. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so it's easier for you to see. All right, so here's our data in A1, the value 5, all the way down to A10 has the value 9. So number 1 says enter a formula in A12, so I'm going to click on cell A12 to sum the values in column A. So A1 through A10, I want to add all of those, and I'm not going to use an Excel function. So the Excel function that does addition is the sum function. I don't want to use that. I want to write the formula without using a function. Anytime I write in a formula, I have to start with an equal sign, so I'll type equals in A12. Now notice I can see it here in cell A12, but I also see in the formula window up above what I'm typing in cell A12. So I can see that formula in both places. So I can type here, I want to add what's in A1 plus A2 plus what's in A3, etc. Okay, this is taking a little bit of time to type all of these in here. So another thing that I could do is click on the individual cells. Repeatedly, I could click on A1, and that puts that cell name into the cell for me. And then plus, click on A2, plus, click on A3. So I'm going to do the rest of these that way, just clicking on each cell to get the cell reference into my formula. Now notice that as long as I'm in here editing this formula, if I click anywhere else, like over here in column L, it'll add that to the formula. I don't want to add that to the formula, so I'm just going to backspace to get rid of that. You want to be careful that you hit enter when you're done typing the formula so you won't continue to edit the formula accidentally. A9 and then A10. So there's my formula to add up the contents of cells A1 all the way through A10. I'm going to hit enter, and now I see the result of that formula. Now if I click back on A12, I can see in my formula window what the formula is in that cell. So I could click in here and edit that formula if I want to edit it there, or I could double click in the cell and edit the formula there. Or if I just click once on the cell, if you click once, you're just highlighting the cell. If you click twice, it goes into edit mode in that cell. So right now I'm not in edit mode. I just see the value and I see the formula in the formula window. So it's important to know the difference so you're not accidentally editing a formula when you don't mean to. All right, so we know the sum of those numbers that we see in column A above is 44. Let's move on to what we're supposed to do in 14. And one other thing I forgot to mention here is if I do go into edit mode for the formula is color-coded so that I can see where cell A1 is. That cell is shaded to match the name of that cell in the formula. And so that's kind of a nice feature that we have in Excel formulas. Let's move on to number 2. Enter a formula in A14 to sum the values in column A, but use an Excel formula with a function. So this time we're going to use that sum function, but use 10 separate arguments rather than a single cell range. Okay, so when we work with functions in Excel, so sum is an example of a function. So when I start typing it, a list of possible functions comes up. Excel tells me, oh, you might mean this, or there are lots of other functions in Excel that start with or contain the word SUM. All right, so the sum function, I'm going to open parentheses, and Excel gives me a little reminder of what I can put in there. When you see this, the only required argument here is just one. I could put one thing inside the parentheses. Or I can put multiple arguments separated by commas. But the other arguments after that first one are optional, and that's why they're in brackets. So I could put just the number 1 in here, and I would just get a 1. Right? Or I could say sum the numbers 1 and 2. Get a 3. Now there's a function with 2 arguments. Or I could add more arguments to this. Right? So that's how the sum function works. I can put in 1 or more arguments, but none of these others are required, only the first one. But another thing I can do is just put in a cell reference. I could say, give me the sum of just cell A1. Well, that's just the number 5, so I get the 5. Or I could say sum A1, comma, A2. That's going to sum the contents of those first 2 cells, which is 11. But I want to sum the contents of all of those cells. So right here, the way I have it now, I have 2 separate arguments. This is argument 1 is cell A1. In argument 2, I have cell A2. But I want to sum the contents of all of those cells, so I'm going to type A3, A4, A5, etc. all the way, and I will do my clicking again. It's a little faster than typing. So there I have 10 different arguments. I'm saying sum the contents of those 10 different cells, and I get 44. So notice now we have two ways of getting that sum. In the first one, I wrote a formula that is just cell references and operation signs. I just have addition signs there. There's no Excel function. There's no word telling Excel what to do with those cells. I'm just adding them up. And in the second, for the second question, I've also gotten the same sum, but I've done it using the sum function with 10 different arguments inside those parentheses. Now remember, the sum function only requires a single argument, so it's possible for me to get the sum of all those cells in such a way that I only have one argument. So I could say sum, and then I can just click and drag to select the entire range of cells that I want. So I can click in A1 and drag all the way down to A10, and notice the syntax there. I have a colon in between the start and the end, and that colon says give me everything in between. So from A1 all the way to A10, and now I have just one argument. So notice there are no commas now. That's just the first argument is a whole cell range instead of just being a single cell. And again, I get the 44. Now I could, for example, go from A1 to A9. All right, that gives me 35. And then I could add another argument that is that A10. And I get the 44 again. Now I've got the same thing happening, but I've written it as two separate arguments inside that sum function. All right, so there are lots of different ways to do that. In this one, we were instructed to sum those values A1 through A10, but have just one argument that is a cell range, and that's what this is. A1 through A10 is a range of cells. All right, so we've done that same thing in three different ways. Now let's move on to number 4. Show formulas on this sheet to compare the three approaches to this problem. All right, so if you click on the Formulas tab up above, the Formulas tab, in the Formula Auditing group, there is a Show Formulas button. If you click on that, it will show you the formulas that are in those three cells. And so I'm going to make A a little bit wider. If you hover over the right edge of a column, you can drag that to be wider or narrower. You can also double click it to auto fit the contents of the cells so that you can see everything that's in them. So now I'm looking at those three, and it's just another way to compare them. So that's just showing me the formulas without making any changes in the sheet. And I can click that button again. It says number 6, hide the formulas, so you again see the result of the formulas. So we'll just click that button again. All right, so that was number 6. Number 7, write a formula in A18 right here to only add the values in A1 through A3 and A8 through A10. So we're going to use the sum function again, and we will select A1 through A3, and then it says A8 through A10. So I need a second cell range. So there's two ways to do this. I can put a comma and then select A8 through A10 like that. So I have selected the first, typed a comma, and then selected the second. All right, and I get 37. Or another way to do this, let me delete that. To show you another way to get the same thing is to select the first one, A1 through A3, and then hold down Control, and this lets you select a non-adjacent cell range. So if you need to select cell ranges that aren't touching, that aren't next to each other, then you hold down Control in between, And while I'm holding control, then I can click on A8 and drag down to A10, and notice that it added the comma for me. So it's a way to get non-adjacent cell ranges selected if you ever need that. Okay, and that answer is 37. All right, that was number 7. Now number 8, we're going to write a formula in A20 to count the number of values in A1 through A10. So this is just going to count for this range of cells. It's going to count and see how many of those have a value in them. So that's what the count function does. It counts, it gives you a little definition here. It counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. All right, so I'm going to count A1 through A10. All 10 of those have numbers, so the answer I get from this should be 10. And it is. We get a 10. Okay, so, and one thing to note here, that's the count function. The count, if you ever need to count cells that don't have numbers, that have text or a combination of numbers and text, then you will want to use the count A function. So when we start typing count, I'll do it right here. If you notice, there's count. That's what we just did. Count A, if we select that one, that counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So they can have anything in them, numbers, letters, symbols, and it'll just count them if they aren't empty. So that's another option that works in certain situations. Okay, let's see, that was number 8. We counted the numbers. Now let's write a formula in A22 to divide the sum in A16 by the count in A20. Okay, so we're going to divide. We want to take A16 that has that 44 in it and divide that by the count. So we're taking the sum of those 10 numbers and dividing by how many there are. There are 10 of them. And we get 4.4. Okay, so now the next question is, what did we just do? We took the sum of these 10 numbers and divided it by 10. So what is that? That's how you calculate an average, right? So which Excel function could be applied to that range of cells to produce this value? So what we did was we wrote an Excel formula to do that calculation, to calculate the average, without using an Excel function. So this is a formula without a function. Now let's try to use a function to do it. So we could do that as well. If you just start typing the word average, you see lots of options, but the second one is what we want. Straight arithmetic average. So we want to average the values in A1 through A10. And then we can close parentheses and hit enter. And again, we get 4.4. So let's think about what this first one did. This first formula, it took the value in A16. Well, that was a sum of 10 numbers. And then it took the value in A20. That was a count of how many there are. So the sum of the 10 divided by 10 was the average. And then alternatively, we could use the average function to do the same thing. All right, so that just shows you in several different ways how in Excel there are often multiple ways to do the same thing. And sometimes one way will be more convenient than the other. All right, the last one, write a formula in A26 to divide the value in A12, which is this 44. Divide that value by A7. A7 has a 0 in it. So we're going to write A12 divided by A7. So there's my formula, A12 divided by A7. And when I hit enter, I get this ugly thing, which is an error message. All right, the error message is saying you're not supposed to divide by 0. There's a problem with this formula. All right, so that is one of several different error messages you can get in Excel. So that's just a warning to watch out for those as you're working with formulas and functions. Sometimes if you do something that Excel says that's a no-no, then you will get a message like this, and that just means check out your formula, see what the problem is. All right, so that's practice 1. Let's move on to practice 2. Okay, in this one, make that a little bigger as well. All right, the first thing we're going to do is says instructions over here, enter a formula in D3 to calculate the total price for tamales carnitas. Okay, so this is an invoice for catering. In this first line item, we see carnitas, we see the individual price per item, and 20 of those were ordered. So if we want to calculate the total price here for that line, we start our formula. We just want to multiply the price times the quantity ordered. So we can do that with an Excel formula, and then I'll click on the price cell, B3, multiply by, use an asterisk for multiplication, and then click on C3. Okay, so there's my total price for that line. I'll do the same thing. I can do the same thing in the next line, but let's look at this next step. It says, now you can copy and paste or use the fill handle to repeat the formula for the next 2 items. So this formula is working well. If I want to do that same type of operation in the next 2 rows, if you look in the bottom right corner of that cell, there's a little green box. I can hover over that until I get these crosshairs for my pointer, and I'm going to click on that and drag down 2 times, and that applies that same formula in the next 2 rows. So notice what happened. My first row, I see the cells are B3 and C3. In the next row, the cells are B4 and C4. So Excel is smart. It knows that as you copy a formula down, it's expecting that you want to increase the row number. So when the formula row number increases, then the cells in that formula, their row numbers will also increase. So that made quick work of that. Now the next step is assuming a 7% sales tax, calculate the amount of tax for the invoice in cell D6. So I'm going to do that right here. I'm going to calculate the sales tax and then use the Excel sum function where needed. Before I can calculate the tax, I need to know what the subtotal is. I need the sum of these things. So I'm going to type that first because I have to calculate the tax for that sum. So I'm going to use the sum function, and I'm going to select those 3 cells. So there's my sum, and then the sales tax is going to be 7% of that total. So I'll multiply this by 0.07 to get 7% of it. All right, so $19.19 is my sales tax. And now the total for the invoice is going to be the sum of these items plus that sales tax. So I'm going to use the sum function again. And I'm going to select that range of cells. And there's my total. All right, so that was practice 1 and 2. At this point, you want to save your work. Be sure and save this into your Excel 1 folder. And then you can submit it for grading in XPrep. And remember that once you've submitted it for grading, if you missed anything, you want to check out your graded submission and look at that score report tab to see some suggestions for how to make corrections to whatever you missed. If you have trouble with anything, as always, reach out to your instructor.